So we've got all of the individual drum subtracks now mixed, just using a little bit of EQ where necessary, and you can see that I've actually track stacked or grouped all of the individual subtracks now into a drum group. What we're going to do is we're going to use one of Logic's multi-effects units to process this group. We're going to use Phat effects to saturate the group, to give it a sense of consistency, mimicking a technique where producers would drive sounds through a desk to harmonically excite them. And the reason why we're going to do this is to make it sound like all of these individual subtracks were driven through the same desk, recorded within the same room, so to speak. So I'm just going to go to the audio effects slot and add Phat effects. And you can see this is a Phat effects unit. Now you can see it's a modular unit. Here are all the individual modules. We've got bandpass, distortion, mod effects, bass enhancer, compressor, and a filter. And we've got also 3 different modulation sources for which we can use to affect each of these modules. Down at the bottom here, we can see that in fact each of these modules can be moved in terms of their signal flow, giving it an extra sense of being able to customize the workflow as appropriate. Now, as you can see from my sort of default setting, all of the modules are turned off. So I definitely would recommend those of us who are looking at Phat effects for the first time to turn all of the different modules off and then save as default, because that's a nice, as far as I'm concerned, that is a nice starting point. So what we're going to do with Phat effects. So if I have my drum group soloed, we will be able to hear how the drum groups sound without it being processed at all. And then what we're going to look at to start with is this distortion setting here. Now, we have 3-stage distortion, 3-stage saturation within the Phat effects, and each stage is user defined in terms of the distortion or the saturation algorithm that we can choose. Now, some of these have different characteristics. For example, the exciter will saturate and bring out high end, so especially on a drum group, things like tops of snares, tops of hi-hats, whereas other algorithms might accentuate other different parts of the frequency spectrum. For example, dirt and grit really bring out the mids, tube will accentuate the lows and make the kicks really warm. So I'm going to start with a bit of tube saturation. We don't have to push this too far. Might actually help if we can hear the kick drum. So I'm just going to loop from bar 5. Bring that down to 0 again. And as you can hear, as we go up towards 40%, those kicks are getting really nice and saturated. But that's a bit too far, so we want to dial this back. Nice at about 20%. So let's turn that off, do before and after. You'll hear as well that we've started to introduce quite a lot of gain to the signal, so we need to look at that, but maybe towards the end. So I think maybe at around 15 would be nicer, maybe just around there. So we've got a nice bit of warmth now on the kick drum, but let's start introducing some of the other different stages to see if we can accentuate other parts of the drum kit. So I'm going to look at maybe dirt or grit, see if we can bring out some snap in the snare. Dirt's not really doing it for me on this drum kit. Let's try grit. That's better. Okay, now last but not least, let's bring the exciter out and listen to the crispness it gives to the hi-hats. So as you can see, when we do it before and after, when we turn the distortion unit off, there is quite a drastic leap in gain. So that's the first part of the Phat effects that we're going to look at, using the distortion unit to really saturate this drum group and give it a sense of fatness, give it a sense of consistency, and mimic the sound that you might create when you drive a signal through an analog desk. The second part of the Phat effects unit we're going to look at is on the top left here, which is the bandpass filter. Now, this is a very, very resonant bandpass filter with a resonant peak defined at the frequency where you kind of place the slider. On a sort of visual level, it sort of looks a bit like a bit like that. So depending on the frequency that you set on the bandpass, you get a very nice sort of accentuation of that frequency. And this is great for bringing out the thump in the kick drum. So let's have a little sweep of this and see if we can isolate and find that sweet spot in the kick which we can accentuate using this bandpass filter. I think we've gone a bit too far. About there. It's kind of minimal. It's sounding a little bit fatter, around 40 Hertz. Nice. So using the bandpass filter to just bring out the thud of the kick. Of course, as we said, this is a modular effect unit. We can change the routing. So let's see what it sounds like when we move the bandpass. At the moment, we can see it's situated before the distortion part of Phat effects. So the output of the bandpass is being fed into the input of the grit. So let's move this after, see what difference it gives. It's much better. It's a bit cleaner. I'm kind of preferring it after the saturation, to be honest. So I'm happy with the effect that we've got there. The last thing we need to do before we're kind of happy and we can sign off using this Phat effects unit is to address this quite drastic increase in gain from adding the bandpass filter and adding the distortion into the signal. So as you can hear when I turn the unit off, it's a lot quieter when I turn it off. So we're going to match the input gain to the output gain. So first of all, I'm going to look at the channel strip and make a mental note of the highest level when it's playing through without this on. So we're about -6.7. Now with the Phat effects unit on, we are at 0 dB. So I need to turn the output down just so we can match. Pretty much there, well, a little bit. So that's before and after. Trying to match the input and the output gain. The reason why we look to do this is because if we don't match the input to the output gain, quite often we can fool ourselves into thinking that the effect that we have applied is good just because the signal is louder. Now, what we want to hear when we apply something like Phat effects, especially if we're saturating, it's not the fact that we've made the signal louder, it's the fact that we've saturated the signal and it sounds more consistent and we can pick up more of the details in the signal. So by matching the input and the output gain, we don't get that, oh, it's so much louder, it must be therefore better effect where we fool our brains. So we can hear now just the effect in isolation. So and after. I don't think we've nailed it just right. I think maybe a slight bit too much tube. I definitely think around the mids it sounds a lot more crunchy. Generally everything sounds a lot more sort of consistent and stuck together. A bit more energy as well in the mids and the high end. So that is using Phat effects, the distortion, 3-stage saturation, bandpass filter to bring out the low end, the fatness in the kick, and also using the master section to match the input and the output signals so that we just hear the effect of the saturation that we have applied and not this increase in gain, which can quite often fool us into thinking the processing that we have applied is good just because it's loud.